Right, good evening everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of Audit and Governance Committee. We have apologies from the Chair, Councillor Ahmed, so if Councillor Burnett as the Vice Chair, if you can chair this meeting.
Okay. Same for absent.
Non-Chair.
Okay. Well, if we go on to the minutes of the meeting, the first one is the minutes of the 3rd of March 2021, page 5 to 12. Has everybody got sight of those?
Yeah, I agree with them.
You agree? Okay.
So, sorry, Chair. According to these minutes, I was both present and absent.
So can you say that again?
Yes, sorry. According to the minutes, I was both here and not here. I think I was actually absent from that meeting.
Okay, so
We'll amend that.
Yeah.
Besides, it's Councillor Underwood. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so those that were present at the time are all in agreement with the minutes? Okay, right. Do we need a seconder and proposal, or is that sufficient now? That's sufficient, yeah. Okay, excellent. Can we now go on to agenda item 2.2, minutes of the 18th of May? Right. Is everybody that was in attendance for the 18th of May in agreement on those? That's page 13 to 13. Yeah, Councillor Underwood, were you there? Yeah? Okay. Excellent. Is that okay, Matt?
That's fine, Chair.
Right, excellent. We're now section 106. Item 3, section 106, Local Government Finance Act 1992. Those items on the agenda affected by section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 will be identified at the meeting. Any member so affected is reminded that they should disclose the fact and refrain from voting on those items. Item 9(4), declarations of interest. Members are reminded that they must disclose both the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest and any personal interest that they have in any matter to be considered at the meeting, unless the interest is a sensitive interest, in which event they need not disclose the nature of the interest. A member with a disclosable pecuniary interest must not further participate in any discussion of, vote on, or take any executive step in relation to the items of business. A member with a personal interest, which a member of the public with knowledge of the relevant facts would reasonably regard as so significant that it is likely to prejudice the member's judgment of the public interest, must similarly not participate in any discussion of, vote on, or take any executive steps in relation to the items of business. Disclosable pecuniary interest and personal interest are defined in the Council's Code of Conduct for members and co-opted members. Item 5, urgent business. Are there any urgent business?
Non-Chair.
Item 7, external audit position statement. Report of the external auditor, page 14 to 19.
Apologies, Chair. Can I please declare an interest under item 4 in relation to item 7, the fact that I'm a director of LAL?
So, officer, does that Councillor Hussain cannot take part in the discussions for item 7 or be present?
Chair, I've already sought advice from the monitoring officer. According to the monitoring officer, given that the item itself is basically to be noted, I can still participate.
Okay, so you can
Yeah, I've already, yes, I can. Yes.
Pose.
And that was Mark Turner, the monitoring officer, who so advised. Thank you.
Over to auditor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name's Neil Harris. I'm an associate partner working in EY's government and public sector assurance practice based in our Luton office, and I'm the key audit partner for Luton Borough Council for the audit of the financial year ended 31st of March 2019. Now, some members of this committee will recall that throughout the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, I have been attending the virtual meetings of this committee to set out the response that the external auditors have been taking to the pervasive impact that the COVID-19 outbreak has had on the aviation industry, in particular the level of exposure that the Council has to the current financial and operating position that LAL faces, given that the Council, given that LAL is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Council and is consolidated into the Council's group accounts. I've prepared, I've attended and provided verbal position statements setting out the work that we are undertaking as external auditors, but with the passage of time, and particularly some of the recent decisions that MHCLG have taken associated with the capitalisation directions and also the setting of the 21-22 budget and imminent decisions associated with LAL's stabilisation plan. As your external auditors, we did think it was appropriate to bring a written position statement setting out those areas associated with our audit responsibilities that we have remaining questions and in some areas some concerns associated with risks of significant weaknesses associated with the Council's ongoing financial sustainability and the exposure it has to LAL's position around stabilisation. Pages 15 to 18 of your papers sets out the background of why we're issuing the position statement now. This has been driven by changes in the National Audit Office Code of Practice that from the 2021 financial year onwards, where an auditor becomes aware that there could be risks to significant weaknesses associated with any aspect of a council's financial management and governance, an auditor has that responsibility to draw that to the attention of those charged with governance, which is this committee, as soon as possible and not to wait until the conclusion of the audit. Now, members of this committee will be aware that we've not yet issued our opinion on both the 18-19 and the 19-20 financial statements, largely because we are waiting for we have been waiting for information associated with disclosures associated with the going concern associated with LAL and also judgments associated with the capitalisation of airport expansion schemes. Now the report, and I won't go through each of the questions and concerns that we've expressed to the Council's officers line by line, but if I just draw out just some of the key themes. The key themes that we have been discussing with the Council senior management and our own perspective on the actions that need to be taken at this stage is we have recommended, and the Council are taking forward, a review of options associated with ownership that in terms of any future decisions that are taken around the stabilisation of LAL and the commitments that the Council may be asked to take around borrowing and future financial commitments, looks at all of the options open to it around the current interest that the Council has in LAL, and that is taken at the point at which decisions are taken on future financial commitments. The second area is impairment reviews, and I'd probably split this into two parts. The first is the impairment of whether there's an impairment review that should be undertaken around the recoverability of the debenture loans that have been issued from the Council to LAL, given the position that LAL's in at the moment and how recoverable those are. And secondly, how sufficiently certain future airport expansion schemes are, and I'm particularly thinking of the DCO application and also the Century Park Access Road scheme. There are obviously ongoing projects associated with DART where we're keen to understand the total financial commitment that LAL may have to the current project and what that might mean for the Council. And also it's important that the Council gets a clear and up-to-date position on the market valuation of the airport to inform a choice associated with the decisions that the council takes. Now, the Council has been proactively responding to our concerns, and by the end of this month, my understanding, and certainly from ongoing discussions with the Chief Financial Officer, the Council are intending to take a report to its FRG group and also to the Council's executive later this month that will set out a proposed decision associated with the LAL stabilisation plan. And in so doing, the Council are in the process of responding to all of the areas of questions and concerns that we've expressed in this report. Obviously, there's a lot of complexity and detail contained in the responses to all of these points. And to support me, I do have experts in our corporate finance team in EY that have expertise in the aviation industry that will be supporting me to review the assumptions underpinning the financial models within LAL and the implications that might have on the commitments that the council could be taking on, and what does that mean for our responsibilities as your external auditor. Obviously, this report also makes clear that we need to review how the council's responding to these matters. We do note on the very first page of the report the actions that the council is undertaking. They have a specialist review, a specialist team headed up by Jacobs that's undertaking a review for the council on the stabilisation plan and what that means for the council. There is a separate review into the ownership position that I've mentioned, and there's been a lot of work to stress test the LAL medium-term financial plan to take account of assumptions associated with the DART scheme, the mid-term review of airport expansion plans, the negotiations with the special force majeure, and all of that is being brought together now in a lot of detail that the council will be bringing to its executive, and will be needing to take a view from an external auditor as to whether there are any remaining matters that we would be minded to challenge from our perspective as your auditor. The report concludes that, clearly given this is such a significant matter, as we conclude our 18-19 and on our 19-20 audits, we will want to consider the steps that the council's taken to respond to all these points, and then determine what further reporting we would wish to do. And we have particular statutory powers under the Local Audit and Accountability Act and the National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice that we could use to, where appropriate and where we believe that to be necessary. To inform our final opinions, both in terms of any future reporting and the opinions associated with the closure of the 18-19 and 19-20 accounts, this will also be subject to various professional practice consultations and quality assurance processes that I need to go through within EY, and that process will be taking place as soon as we've reached a settled view on the information that's coming this month from the council. I think with that, Chair, I think I will pause and take any questions, because I'd like to think that the paper itself has been read, and I'm happy to take any questions associated with points of detail in the report. Thank you.
So if I do Councillor A. Hussain and then Councillor Underwood.
Thanks, Neil. Neil, so is the Jacobs review part of the 18-19, 19-20 decision making?
So I think the Jacobs review is to inform the decisions that the council is taking now associated with the stabilisation plan in LAL, and what does that mean for their council's own commitments. It will have an impact on 18-19, simply because the audit's been held in abeyance, because there needs to be disclosures associated with the going concern, or not just of LAL, but then how LAL is consolidated into the council's group accounts, and the council has to prepare a going concern note that looks at the position 12 months out from the proposed date of the audit report. But given how pervasive the COVID-19 outbreak has had, clearly that going concern note needs to take into account the impact from LAL on the council's ongoing viability, the level of reserves, and the impact of providing support to LAL on the council's future level of available to use reserves, and also the impact it has on its level of borrowing and cash, and its cash projections for the next 12 months, and setting out the uncertainties contained within the assumptions within LAL's medium-term plan.
Yeah. 18, 19, 19, 20, you said you're waiting for LAL. How cooperative are LAL with you?
Councillor Abbas, can you just speak up, please? Because I don't think your voice is projecting
I've
clear enough.
Sorry. Yeah, so 18, 19, 19, 20, you said at the beginning of your presentation that you were waiting for LAL. That is the reason behind it. So how cooperative have they been through this process with you now?
So in all my verbal updates to this committee, and this has been clearly a very complex and significant issue for the council and LAL, there's been a lot of iterative information that's been forthcoming both from the council and LAL, but there was certainly an agreement at the back end of last year that there needed to be a more settled position on the stabilisation plan and what the likely outcome of the negotiations were on the special force majeure, to enable not just ourselves to conclude on the disclosures and judgments in the financial statements associated with going concern and any associated impairment judgments on capitalisation of airport expansion schemes, but also that informs the work that PwC are doing, who are the auditors of LAL. And we do liaise regularly with PwC as LAL's auditors, and you may well be aware that LAL's financial statements for the 1920 financial year still remain open for exactly the same reasons as the council's.
Is that okay, Councillor A. Hussain? Right, Councillor Underwood?
Thank you, Chair. What happens if the council don't reach a settled position?
Underwood, can you speak up, please? Because it's being recorded. We've got to make sure our voice projects clearer, please. Or bring
Sure.
the mic nearer to you, if you can, or you go. That's it.
Okay, yes. What happens if the council, for whatever reason, doesn't reach a settled position, as you described in the paper?
Can I just clarify the question? Is that the settled position in terms of the stabilisation plan to LAL? Or, yeah. Well, obviously, I think we just need to take a view. I think we're at a stage now, given that this is part of the reason why we've issued a position statement, and I think the officers are in support of this as well, that I think it's in everyone's interest to try to draw to a conclusion now the 18-19 and the 19-20 financial statements, because a lot of the decisions that the council are taking are now well into, have now gone beyond 2021, we're now into 21-22, and I think we need to bring the position up to date. I think for the first part of last year, when the COVID-19 outbreak hit, I think it was quite clear that there was a lot for the council to work through with LAL about the implications that this would have. I think now this is reaching more of a, this position's crystallising, and I think there's much more of a clearer view now about what level of stabilisation LAL will need, and the council will be able to take a more informed view about what does that mean for their own commitments, which is why I think now is an opportune time to look at the options that the council needs to take before it reaches a decision. Now, if the council doesn't take a settled position at that stage, that could be quite appropriate for it to do so. I think where the external auditor comes in is if the council takes a decision that actually we don't think is fully informed, because then we have various options open to us as the external auditor to either call that out or express some concerns and further recommendations, which is why the position statement has been written as is, because it's recognising the council are in progress and are bringing together a lot of detail and support behind these points that we've raised in the report, but clearly we need to review the outcome of that and determine what that means for our audit responsibilities.
Yep, thank you. So just to confirm, following on from Councillor Hussein's question, so the 18-19 and the 19-20 accounts, that they're not dependent at all on what's the position that you set out?
I think, yeah, I think they are in the sense that if we can get to a position where the council makes a decision one way or another on the stabilisation plan at LAL Executive later this month, that enables Dev as the CFO to then pull together the going concern disclosure note that is integral to be inserted into the council's group accounts for the 18-19 financial year, and then that will then flow into the 19-20 financial year as well. At various stages of this, you could have prepared a going concern disclosure note. The level of material uncertainty, I think, contained within that would be probably a lot higher immediately after the COVID-19 outbreak is probably the position it is now.
Okay, Councillor Underwood. Councillor Chapman. It's got his. It's Dev and then Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Just from the council point of view, as a council section 151 officer, I just want to give a brief update here. So the stabilization plan for LAL is a second phase of the stabilization plan. So what we've done so far, just to address the main issue when the pandemic hit the council, is to prepare an emergency budget. And that emergency budget included the first phase of the stabilization plan for LAL. So for 2019-2021, we prepared that emergency budget to stabilize both LAL and LBC. And throughout the whole process, we're in constant discussion with EY. So whatever we are doing, just coming back to your point, Councillor, is we're fully informed and we are taking EY's view as well. So we're working in parallel. It's not we're doing things and then we ask EY to review. So we're doing it in parallel. The budget, yeah. with EY and LAL as well, yeah, because LAL is a wholly owned subsidiary. So when we finalize the group accounts, so the group accounts include the subsidiary. So if there are any issues with the subsidiary where the auditors have got issues or concern, then that will reflect in the group accounts, which the council will have to approve. And that's why Neil is saying is we have to look at the going concern of both LAL and LBC, and those are the things which we're addressing. So we are in a journey here. That's a point which I would like to make. The journey started with the first stabilization plan, and we know that we hit the pandemic, and we are in constant discussion with EY, and that was the right thing to do, to bring an emergency budget and to stabilize, and we are one of the first council to bring an emergency budget. So the scale of that stabilization and looking at the second phase of the stabilization is quite significant, but as we take into account a lot of airports, a lot of companies, they are bringing stabilization plan for their own company. So the next stage of the stabilization, with the second stage of stabilization, that was approved as part of the budget. So it was go through the executive and approved. And there was another report which talks about a framework within which the council will decide what sort of support the council will provide to the airport. And that framework at that point, when it was approved in February, is to give reassurance to say, yes, officers has a framework where the council has approved, the executive, and work within that framework. And that framework included that any stabilization plan or financial support to LAL shouldn't have an impact on the council in terms of the revenue budget. So we officers, we are working within that framework agreed by executive, and it went through FRG as well through the stream process, but that framework has got a capital program already approved by the council. So in February, the quantum was approved, but was subject to us going and doing that detailed scrutiny, and that's why there was around 10 or 15 recommendations in that stabilization plan, that framework, and officers are working to make sure we work within that framework. And that's included, as Neil mentioned, all the special force majeure, all the projects where we are, an update on those projects, and that is what is coming back to the executive in June. So that, as I said, it's not something, it's a continuation of that journey. And throughout that journey, we're having discussion. So all the FRG members who were yesterday at the training, so we give a detailed training to FRG to scrutinize, and members of audit committee were there as well. So those reports which we've shared with you lays out the foundation within which we are going to work. And I've shared with Neil as well, as Neil, as always, he gives very detailed comments. So we got a very good working relation to share everything. So those comments and everything will feed into the report which will go to executive and to say now here the second phase of the stabilization. Now coming back to your point you've made is what will happen with the what if. The what if, the report will present the options, and officers will be coming to say these are the options and what are the impact of the alternative options. So members of the executive and FRG will review and give their comments, but members of the executive will look at it and they say, okay, here's option A, option B, and officers will be coming as a team to say, here's what we regard as our preferred options. Now, we are constant in touch with Ernst & Young, and by that time, we've got a discussion and a good understanding with Neil, and his team is working flat out on these as well, as all the consultants, as the finance team as well. And if there are any issues at that time, we'll discuss that with our auditors. So we hope that when we bring that report, we've got everybody's sort of views and everything in that report, which will inform, as Neil said, inform the executive to make the right decision based on the information which we have. Now, one of the things we know is COVID is a risk, so we don't know what will happen with COVID, but we'll have to make decisions and we have to decide, because both the council will have to carry on providing the service, and LAL as a private company will have to start to in the recovery phase. So those are the things, are important decisions. We are talking about quite significant amount of money as well. And as Neil said, in terms of options, is how we fund, how we finance, what impact. All these are being considered. And as I said, the detailed report was shared to the training. So you've got both FRG report and audit committee report. But what we are planning here, especially for audit committee members, is what is in that draft report will be very much the foundation on which the executive will make decisions, so the FRG and the executive. So the substance of the report won't change. There are very detailed recommendations which executive will have to go through, and then the FRG will review and will bring their findings to the executive committee, and will bring a paper to audit committee in your capacity to assess the risk, and that paper has already been shared. So it's a long ICT journey started back in March. So we are going through that journey, and we hope that will come out of this COVID, and there's discussion which is taking place in terms of the special force measure. So I think we are reaching that point, especially going back to your point and your point as well. Okay, what impact it will have on the accounts, 18, 19, 19, 20. So as Neil mentioned, when the auditors sign the account, they will have to form a view what is going to be the impact on the council as a going concern over the next 12 to 15 months. And that's reassurance we have to provide to the auditors. And that's what Neil said, sensitivity analysis, scenario analysis, what if, so what happens if this and that. And based on that, to form that view. So I just wanted to give a brief update to the committee to say everything is done in order to satisfy the auditors, but still Neil will have to go through what is being presented as evidence. And at the same time, to make sure that the committee can scrutinize, audit committee are content with what we are doing, and at this time, executive has got all the information to form that decision, which will be on the 28th of June. So just to wrap up, is a lot of work which is going behind this, and training is being provided. There will be training to executive members as well. So we're putting all the things to make sure that is done on a very sound basis. So thank you, Chair.
Are you okay, Councillor Chapman? Okay.
Dev, that's fair enough that we're moving from phase 1 to phase 2 stabilisation, yeah, I'm in agreement with that. But I think what Neil and this report is saying, that they're looking for a closure on 18, 19, 19, 20, which is worrying because we are moving into 21, 22, soon another couple of months we'll be moving into 22, 23, okay, and we still haven't had a closure or a report to say how the audits from 2018 to 2020 were. This is worrying, and fine, I understand COVID came last year, but these audits from 18, 19, 19, 20, when there was no COVID, you know, so, and we're moving on to the next phase now of the stabilization, which is phase 2, you know, and it's a bit worrying that we are looking ahead, looking for investment and everything, but then we don't know the previous outcome of the auditor's report, what's been happening. It feels like it's hidden, and I think this is worrying, especially if LAL are not disclosing information either. It feels like they're not disclosing information here, you know, and then we are asked as members to invest into LAL as well going into the future.
There are a couple of things, there are a couple of questions, very valid questions. Okay, first, so if we, Neil can join, but I will just give from the council, sort of section 151. 1819, we were very close to signing the 1819 accounts. But as I've just mentioned, based on accounting standard and audit practice, when the auditors signed the accounts, that probably might have been around sort of March, April time. So then when COVID-19 hit, I think the financial regulation said, okay, there is a big issue in terms of going concern, not just for the council, but the whole UK and the world. So they issued some directive to say, okay, auditors will need to reconsider the going concern. Yeah, I think Neil can brief us on that. So it was for private company as well to say, look, because of the COVID, now all these uncertainties will have to be viewed. So there was detailed guidance issued by, is it the Financial Reporting Council? Yeah. So they are responsible. So it came for so all the private, all the public company. So that's where we were just about to get everything finalized when COVID hit. So 1819 again becomes from the date of the signing of the accounts, i.e. March 2020, 15 months ahead. So when Financial Reporting Council issued detailed guidance that auditors will have to consider when they are auditing, that 1819. So 1920 is very much dependent because that as well is going to be signed. So that's what we call in technical term post-balance sheet events. So events which happen after the balance sheet date, so you're absolutely right, the balance sheet date was back in 1819 and 1920. But the post-balance sheet event is not from the date of the balance sheet, but the date from auditors signing the accounts. And that's key. So that's why we have been caught. There are other, about quite a significant amount of council or in a similar position, Neil. Yeah. So I think especially with our we've got an airport, so we've got quite a lot of commercial, private sector type of activities. So that's why we are here. So hopefully the plan here is, my aim is by 28th of June, when we have that executive report approved, that will give the reassurance to LAL as well that they've got a stabilization plan so that they can plan. So LAL has got an interest in terms of that stabilization plan, and then LAL auditors as well will look at it to say, yes, there is a stabilization and recovery plan for their financial, for them to issue that, yes, LAL is a going concern. And that is linked, then comes to the group accounts, which then we as a council, we have to sign the group accounts. So it's very much linked. And then Neil will be comfortable to say, now we look at the cash flow, we look at your borrowing requirement, we look at the way you're planning your finances, and we look at the impact of COVID. We've done some scenario sensitivity analysis, and we are comfortable from the date they're signing the account, the next 15 months. So these are the things. So it's as Neil said, it's technical. There's a lot of work which goes, but when we're talking about the quantum and yeah, it's yeah, we have to make sure as a council we do everything to satisfy the auditors and satisfy members as well, to make sure that whatever question, whatever concern, everything is being addressed.
And then Councillor Chapman.
The only point I wanted to add to that is more a point about our responsibilities under the National Audit Office Code of Practice, and particularly thinking about value for money arrangements. This is one of the reasons why we've issued this position statement, because I think it's important that if when we're looking through all of the decision making that the council's undertaking now, Councillor Hussain, you're quite right, the decisions have been taken during and then following the 2021 financial year into 21-22. I think the National Audit Office revisions to its code of practice give auditors a lot more flexibility to report as soon as they become aware of any particular concerns associated with financial sustainability, governance, how information has been used in decision making, and if we have any significant concerns or believe there are weaknesses that arise from that, we have to report as soon as we become aware of it, and we shouldn't be waiting for the conclusion of historic accounts audits to do that. And that's the purpose of producing this position statement today, to say, look, we recognise where we are with the outstanding audits of accounts, but these are matters we need to bring to your attention, and we will be considering it even while the audits are still open for the 2021 and the 2020 and the 21-22 financial year as well.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things just help me out. I can't remember what the acronym for the MHCLG is on the
Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government.
So, like the government, I'll put shorthand on that. Just for me, if I'm being too simplistic, I apologise. But as I see it, is the airport's been brilliant up till now, backed by all governments of all colours. We've had a change, as I understand it, that they don't like councils being involved in what is a commercial operation, and there's a discussion as to whether the airport is deemed by the current government as a commercial operation. So the kind of goalposts have moved in the last couple of years, as I see it. So whereas before we perhaps could have had some risk, and we've never had COVID to create such a risk, but we're being even more scrutinised as a council and would not be allowed to have a minimal risk, and obviously the airport is quite a big risk with the current situation. Is that basic analogy kind of correct, just as a starting point? Very basic, very...
Sorry, Dev, can I come in on that? Do you mind? Right. So, no, it's okay. Austerity brought around the necessity for us to become more commercial. And it's not just local, it's not just Luton, it's the whole sector. So local authorities up and down the country had to become more commercially minded, entrepreneur, and take risks that they never used to take because of the situation central government put the sector in. So that's number one. We at the time had an airport. So we haven't got anything else. Some local authorities have other assets that they had to do or create opportunities. We had an asset and decided the best thing we could do in order to protect frontline services and the voluntary community sector was to expand the airport. Therefore, we changed our risk model because the government made a decision at the time. So I just wanted to set out clearly, because I've been on the journey, that local authorities were left with no choice. They were either would have gone bust already, because Dev has given us many reports over the years of the financial positions of the sector, so they had to do something. The question on hindsight, maybe where the audit comes in, was the change of the risk profile that we've done. Could we have done it better? Where was the motivation, and what was our raison d'etre? What was our, did some local authority lose sight of their reason for being on the commercial journey? So that's what I just wanted to say. If we didn't expand the airport and what we've done, the situation in Luton would have been worse than where we are now. I'm talking about frontline services, homelessness, education, social care. I mean, we've got authorities like Kent that's given notice to the government that this week they will not be able to, because they're dealing with asylum seekers. So I hope that helps Pete in giving a bit of context on some of the choices the local authority has been left with since 2010. Is that okay? And I hope, Dev, if I've missed anything, please chip in.
I think you've summarized it rightly. The only thing which I would say is, as one of the ministers said, this is 1 in 300 years impact of a recession. So it's even worse than 1930. So I think we'll have to take this into account. If anybody says, oh, we could have predicted this happening, that sort of recession nobody was predicting. So we have to put it into context. So it's good, as Councillor Chaki said, always hindsight is a good thing, but that's even the worst recession in 1930 is not comparable. So I think the council and LAL are working together. Still, the council is delivering the services. LAL has got a critical role to play. Still, the amount of interest we generate from LAL plus the upside on the premium still goes towards supporting a lot of council services. Still, LAL has got around 9 million of community funding, which LAL is still supporting. So LAL is critical in terms of the revenue we generate from LAL. And at the same time, LAL is also dependent on the council to providing the support. So what the council is doing here is not different from what central government is doing. So central government companies like EasyJet are providing significant amount of loan. Because the question here is whether the business we are supporting, or we means the executive decision, is not my decision, I'm here to advise as Section 151, whether that business is a viable business or not. And that's the question. So if the council and officers believe it's a viable business, we are going through this difficult and coming out, and those are scenario we are working, passengers comes out. And based on this scenario and risk analysis, business is a viable business, then it's for the council interest to support, because at the same time, the council services largely depends on LAL being successful as well. So those are the things. And in our discussion, which when we had discussion with and there was a statement made by ministers in Secretary of State in the Parliament as well, that the airport is a national infrastructure. So it's the medical is a national infrastructure, and the investment which has gone to the airport is not considered as a speculative investment. And that's there. It's in the Parliament questioning. So one of the things is that I say, coming back to, I finish that, is 1 in a lifetime. Not in a lifetime, 300 years for this. So we have to put it in context. Now, what will happen to the pandemic? Who knows? Who knows? But council will have to carry on providing services. LAL will carry on supporting that business. Because once you come out of the pandemic, touch wood, everybody's hoping, then it's a viable business. But even right now, the support we are getting in terms of the income and revenue from LAL and the community, it's absolutely vital. So coming back, as Councillor Bernard said, without LAL and the revenue which have been generated, we'd be in a position that services would have been sort of heavily and significantly impacted. So we have to take this into account. But it's difficult decisions. It's no decision of this magnitude is easy, but we have to make sure we make decisions which are based on sound, open, transparent information. And that's what as officers we're trying to work together to put this in front of you with the blessing of the auditors. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think we've in agreement, but not quite understanding. I was just asking the question, which I think you've basically said. The council couldn't survive with the services we've got at the minute without the money from the airport. But unfortunately, because of the, and I'm not trying to do anything in hindsight, I agree. So now we're in the awkward position because of the pandemic that it isn't the kind of cash cow. We're going to have to support it for a number of years potentially, which you would do as a business. You would support your assets. There's no problem. We have a government that's kind of suggesting to us, if I understand it right, well, you can't really do that, boys and girls and Luton Council. We don't want you to support your asset because you're not here to take risk. Is how I'm viewing the government has changed its position since we started. So am I kind of correct in that? And I agree with all the things. It does help us, but because of where we're at, like you're all saying, and this is what we're auditing about, we've got to look at it. So, you know, you could argue, should we expand? And there's an argument for doing that, which you would as a private company or as a state, you know, government, local government. Should you withdraw the funding for expansion and just kind of consolidate the bit you've got at the minute? But I just want a very basic one that, yeah.
That's very fair. My apologies if I didn't respond it directly. So what central government has said is there's two phases to the capitalization. The first phase of the capitalization, which is in the region of 34 million, there's no condition attached to that. So that's the understand, and we work with the consultant and we demonstrated, and that's because of the loss of dividend. So one of the things which was highlighted is not that you've got a gap in the budget because of savings we haven't delivered, but we've got a gap because the dividend which we were expecting, that dividend can't deliver. The second phase, and those are in the capitalization directive, the second phase of the capitalization, which is for 21-22, and that's which is the 14 million, that is dependent on the review which will be carried by MHCLG. And that review, then the MHCLG can come up with conditions. So at this stage, drawing down on that 30 million, which we are still in discussion in MHCLG, the quantum of that drawdown, but is not dependent on MHCLG asking the council what to do and what not to do in terms of our ownership. So MHCLG are not in a position to say whether those investment and give advice on commercial investment. That's not what MHCLG is there. But for the second phase of the drawdown, i.e. the 14 million, then they will look at our books and everything, which they've already done before they agreed on this capitalization directive, and then they can come with, here is some of the conditions for the 14 million. At that point, the council is in a position to say, yes, we agree with those recommendations, or we think we have a better way of doing things. The only condition will be, then we can't draw down on that 40 million. Now, how much of that capitalization and how much of established, all this is being discussed and will be presented in the executive report. Whether MHCLG will say, one of the things MHCLG and Neil raised as well is, now because of the pandemic, how much are we going to rely on those return on our investment? And one of the things you will see when we took the emergency budget and the February budget, the council has removed the dividend. So the reliance on provision of services, there's no reliance on dividend from LAL. So that's one of the things we've decided, we means the council, from recommendation from officers, to say, yes, because of pandemic, because of the risk, that 20 million which we are relying, that has been removed. And the reason why we took an emergency budget is to say how we are going to carry on providing services and at the same time not relying on those dividends. So that's resilience in the council medium-term financial plan has been built in as part of the emergency budget and 2021 budget. When we look at LAL medium-term financial plan, and that's really part of the executive report, which because it's commercially sensitive, so I can't go into the numbers, but as I said, the view of the council, in the same way the view of the government, if a business is viable, then the best thing is to support, because it's a short term. Once you come out of the pandemic, then the business start to generate, then in appropriate time, we will be able to look at generating dividend and what will be the options, how to use those dividend. But that's a discussion which the council will take place. So in terms of the viability of LAL and viability of LBC, that will be recorded. So coming back to your point is, MHCLG, the first phase of the support is not based on any conditions. Yeah. So the second phase, which will be a report, which I'm sure will be a public report, because MHCLG, most of the report are public, so they will look at it and they will form, yeah. But the first report, when it was issued by the consultant, that report was positive.
Just one more. As I see it, in the audit, you're saying about looking at other options of ownership. Well, we currently have, like the cooperative, we own it jointly 50-49. So the only other option is to sell it and make it private. There is no, I can't personally see of another option that the council has. It stay as is or sell it. Am I correct too? Is there a third option? You're saying you're looking at options.
Yeah.
To me, the report should say there are two options, as is or sell it to a private.
I think what an MHCLG as well, their view is, how are you going to look at going forward about the ownership? So owning the airport is not different from having a portfolio of commercial properties worth 100 million, those assets. So both MHCLG and Ernst & Young are not forming a judgment on whether it's an airport, it's the whole assets. So when a company in the private sector goes into some financial, first thing they would say, is there any asset which we can, I wanted to use the word sell, disinvest. Yeah, I don't like using the word sell, and that's why I use ownership. So selling is no. So where the assets where you think is not generating that level of return, we can disinvest. Okay, and that doesn't apply just simply for the airport. It applies to any asset we have, and we do that. There's an asset which was in Hemel Hempstead even before the pandemic. We decided that this is an asset we would like to keep. So when you look at all your portfolio of assets, you look at where you would like to disinvest. But that piece of work is happening is, if we disinvest in any asset, including a stake in the airport, what are the pros and cons of disinvesting? And what are the financial implications? So that piece of work is happening, and that will form part of that executive report. But one of the things which we know, we as a council, the airport is a strategic asset. It's a national infrastructure, and that has been made clear by all cross-party. So we know it's a national, it has got a critical role to play, but on the best value, any council will have to look at, we are in the position here, what do we do? Yeah, and it will not apply, it will apply to, I think before the pandemic, about 15 or 18 months ago, we reviewed all our portfolio of commercial properties. There was a detailed report which was done. So we always do that. Yeah. Even a couple of years ago, every year we discussed with Neil, and Neil asks, demonstrate that ownership, and right. So we do that. It's part of normal. But there's a pandemic or not pandemic, you look at where you can invest better and get better return. So those are the things which take place. But now the sense is a bit more, because we've got a risk, because we've got a support package. So we'll have to do it. But that will be done, as I said, is not uncommon. We have to review all our assets, all our portfolio, including the airport. So that will form part of the 28th of June report. Thank you.
Just for me, in moving forward, can I, Neil, if you bring another statement, can you please reduce the anagram? So if you put in something in, just put, explain it in full, like DCO and CPAR, because these are public documents, and most people do not have a financial background in terminology. That would be good. So that if you could do that, that would help. In moving forward, a question for you, Dev. On the post-balance sheet events that you mentioned in response to Councillor Hussain, has these been picked up regularly and reported back via the exec report on the performance report that goes to the exec? Are these post-balance sheet events reported back that way so that there's transparency? I just wanted to ask that one. And moving forward, I think it would be really good for us to be involved in the work plan, because there's a risk is changing, and it's not just with this and LAO. There will be a change in risk with regards to the commercial investments as you've responded back to Councillor Chapman, because the attractiveness of investing in commercial assets and offices and shops are no longer as attractive as they once were. So I think that would be useful if audit and governance, those sort of stuff are brought to us, and because it's about risk. And the risk register, I think, would also be useful to see, so everybody is on the same page and have understanding as we go through the next municipal year. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So quickly, yeah, the new norm, the pandemic, we will be revisiting the risk register to say what is the strategic risk. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the post-balance sheet, yes. The post-balance sheet is, I don't want to be technical here, but you've got two types of post-balance sheet. One, we call it adjusting, so you have to change the accounts. One is non-adjusting, which you don't have to change the accounts and disclose. So once the account will be finalized, audit committee will look at it, what are the events which are adjusting, and if there are any events which are adjusting, i.e. we have to change the accounts, we'll have to see whether this had an impact on the budget. So then absolutely when we do the budget outturn, we'd say here are the things which happen at that time, and you have to make a provision. And that's where in the accounts you make a provision for any liability or a contingent liability. So absolutely the executive will be well aware of those things. It was just a what is adjusting, what is not adjusting, in which period. And that's coming back to Councillor Abbas's, which one is 18, 19, or 19. So we'll have to go back and we have to look at those items to make sure Council has got a better overall picture on the financial implications.
Will you be doing another position statement, and when, and if so, when? Because we're on a journey, so it would be useful for I and my colleagues to know what is the plan moving forward on the things to get everything solidified. And because you said that we're reaching a crescendo event, so when do you see the crescendo? So we can hopefully you could either enjoy the noise or feel the pain. Yes. If you could elaborate on that, that would be helpful.
I don't have a crystal ball. However, given that we've issued this position statement, I think it is important that we come back as soon as possible to provide an update against that, irrespective of where we are still closing the historic accounts. But this Audit and Governance Committee needs to receive an audit results report from me as part of closing the 18-19 audit. Back to Councillor Hussain's point that actually there is a formality that we need to go through, which is the presentation of an audit results report. The same will apply for the 19-20 financial year, but as that will largely deal with matters to do with, as Dev's described, adjusting or non-adjusting post-balance sheet events and also going concern, that will capture some of the points associated with the LAL position and going concern, but it may not capture them all because it won't capture the ongoing decisions that have been taken, which is why it's really important that irrespective of where we get to and when for the historic accounts, I commit to what I said earlier. Now we've issued this position statement, it's really important that if we have any further points to make or any further reporting points to this committee, we come back as soon as possible and we don't wait. And I can't give a definitive date other than I think we are working very closely and alongside the council to review the information that's forthcoming and I've got specialists to support me in EY to work through that as quickly as possible. We have our quality assurance and professional practice processes to go through, as you can imagine, given the significance and scale of the decisions that the council are taking here. We need to make sure our opinion is of a high quality nature and is the right one as well. And I can't just do that on my own. I represent a firm that will want to make sure we've gone through all of the appropriate due diligence process at our end, but we will conclude this as quickly as we can, and I think that's all I can commit to at the moment.
Hussain comes in, I think for me, as Officer Dev stated, because we're doing a group set of accounts, my concern is not just on the parent, it's on the rest as well that are outstanding. So there's a massive impact that we need to consider. So that is my concern.
I mean, my understanding is that the auditors of LAL are looking to step through what they need to do, ideally before the end of July. That's the last I heard, which would close the 19-20 financial year from their perspective. We aren't always entirely reliant on PwC to do that as the group auditors, and given the nature of the work we have to do at the council, we will form our own decisions and own judgments. But to your point, Chair, about the timing of other things within the group, that's my understanding of the position with Lal as at today's meeting. Yeah.
Councillor Hussain.
Chair, I would like to recommend that we don't wait for the next audit governance meeting. If Neil would like to come back before that meeting, I'm sure the Democratic Services can arrange that meeting and not wait for the next audit governance. I think it's in 3 months' time. Yeah?
Is everybody in agreement with that? Yeah, so we're in agreement for the minutes that if anything happens either way, would that be the same,
Yeah.
correct, Abbas? Abbas? Good or bad, can we please call an emergency audit and governance? Because bad could happen as well as good. Yeah. Is that okay for everybody, yeah?
I think that's right. I mean, you'll note from the date of this report that it's the 22nd of April. We were sharing and discussing this with the Chief Executive and the Chief Financial Officer during March, because we wanted to report this before the end of the financial year, which it related to 2021. And the date of the report was I think in April, but because I think of PERDA and the election process, obviously the committee didn't meet until today. But I absolutely agree. Now the committee is functioning from this year. I would endorse that as a way forward, and I'll be happy to come to a meeting as necessary. Yeah.
Because if anything, people cannot all get here, is it possible to do a hybrid? Have we got the skills? No, I haven't. Have we got the technology capability? So those who could be, depending, because we're going into the summer season, a summer holiday,
Yeah,
be able to do a hybrid?
we're hoping to go to hybrids by end of this month with development control. So that will be the first one. So in theory, we should be able to do a hybrid meeting.
Excellent. That gives us more. Thank you, Councillor Ahabaz, and thank you, Neil. I believe. Right, just check. Is there anything we've got on the agenda where I need to do Local Government Act 1972?
Non-chair. No.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So that's the end of our meeting. Have a good evening. Enjoy the sun while it's here. Take care.